Last time, as you recall, we were talking about the pre-Socratic philosophers in the fashion that they're usually represented in histories of philosophy. A fashion that was probably influenced by the fact that Aristotle, in a passage from his book 1 of his Metaphysics, which we'll be reading later on, Aristotle treated them that way, as pre-scientific people speculating about the basic principles that make nature the way it is. Pre-scientific speculation. That tradition, which seems to go back to Aristotle, has been sort of perpetuated in histories of philosophy. But I'm not convinced that it's the only way or the best way to see the pre-Socratics. There's a second tradition that I don't want to dwell on, particularly, that goes back actually to one of the early Roman thinkers who wrote about the developing concepts of God in the early Greeks. So that you get also discussions of the pre-Socratics as sort of a pre-theology, not just a pre-science, but a pre-theology. And you've been reading the fragments, and you probably began to think that way about things like Heraclitus Logos, or Anaxagoras Nous Mind, reason, you see. There are a number of things which have kindled that line of inquiry, and volumes written on the theology of the early Greek philosophers. But there is a third way that is, I think, much less travelled, which I find particularly fascinating and helpful, and I suspect may be closer to where those pre-Socratic thinkers thought they were, what they thought they were doing. In order to make them out to be pre-scientific people, you have to sort of say, well, they were stimulated to ask these questions about nature by living in that natural environment and encountering people from other cultures who had mythologies of their own. Well, okay, that's plausible. But I think the first place to look is in their own Greek predecessors, you see, in Greek literature. And this is what I want to pursue this afternoon. In fact, I'm not even sure it's fair to Aristotle to say that he interpreted these as pre-scientific because he saw himself as pre-scientific or scientific. I think for Plato and Aristotle, it's true that as far as they're concerned, their metaphysical views, theories of forms, studies of nature, really were part of a larger concern that they had, namely to maintain that there is something that is good by nature, you see. So their concern for the good in nature and in human experience is, I think, a more self-conscious theme, certainly on Plato's part, and to a certain extent Aristotle's part, than all of the metaphysics they get into, and cosmology. We'll see that as we get to Plato. But in any case, the theme that I'm picking up on is what I scribbled on the board here, cosmic justice. Because in the predecessors of the pre-Socratics, the literary predecessors of the pre-Socratics, that's a notion that you get. And I'm suggesting, you see, that the pre-Socratics stand in continuity with these predecessors, in pushing further the emerging idea of cosmic justice. This is a moral universe, you see, in which justice will out. They're pushing this emerging notion further than their literary predecessors, and trying to tell us what kind of a thing nature is, that there should be some sort of rule of moral law in the universe. Do you get the overall idea? You see? That is to say, these earlier literary figures recognize that there are ordered processes of nature. But there are also ordered processes of moral life that you get your due reward, or the fate schedule, you see. So that you have a macrocosm, nature as a whole is ordered, law-governed. The microcosm, your moral life is ordered, law-governed. And in between those two, you have sort of an in-between, the emerging idea of the city-state as a law-governed order of society, you see. And there's a parallel between these three things, the orderliness of nature, the orderliness of the city-state, the orderliness of the moral life. And they see analogies between the three all the time. Now, earlier Greek mythology saw no intelligence behind natural processes producing any harmony or natural law. Nature and the forces behind it and the gods seemed all to be arbitrary. And there was the notion of a very impersonal kind of fate, Moira, which lurks behind the scene and then gets you. Even the gods of Homer seem, at least in the Iliad, to be fickle, limited in what they can do, not particularly interested in human affairs. The interest in that mythology is much more in what's known as the heroic virtues. The virtue of the aristocratic hero, beauty, wealth, status, honor. That's what makes the Greek hero. But these heroes ignored the problems of society, the desperate need of the ordinary people, and even pursued their honor to the detriment of their own real self-interest, you see. So as you read the Iliad, which I assume you have done in Western world lit, you read the Iliad and Odysseus strives in vain to return home, you see. And all the while he's struggling, striving to get home, there are his erstwhile friends devouring his resources and trying to seduce his wife. You remember the narrative? You see? But take a step further than the Iliad to the Odyssey, which centers around Odysseus' son, trying to keep things straightened out at home, very much concerned to get his father back home. In the Odyssey, the gods are becoming interested. There's a gradual evolution going on. There is less focus on the heroic virtues, and the goddess Athena gets involved and helps to secure justice, bringing Odysseus home. It's an interesting development, significant change. Now, you move on to Hesiod, and there's some allusion to this in Stumpf, the secondary source history you're reading. Hesiod, in his Theogony, seems to think that Zeus is really in charge of human affairs. And Zeus's daughter, Dike, which is the Greek word later for right, justice. Zeus's daughter, Dike, actually oversees the affairs of mortals. And then when you take a look at Hesiod's work, Works and Days, it's about ordinary mortals, about the orderliness of their lives. And in it, Hesiod calls for justice and honest labor among the common people. Now, I have a hunch that none of you have read Hesiod's Works and Days, because I discovered there isn't a copy in the library. But I discovered one elsewhere. And here are a couple of selections which may be of interest to you. Listen now to justice, writes Hesiod, and forget violence completely. For Cronus' son, Kronos, time, Cronus' son set up this law for men. Fish, flesh, fowl, each other may devour, for right is not in them, but right he gave to men, and this is best by far. Don't fight it out, but let justice prevail. Or this again, those who give to every man, those from abroad and those from home, straight judgments, and do not transgress the just, their city flourishes. Their people prosper, too. Peace, the children's guardian, patrols the land, and Zeus, far-seeing, doesn't plan cruel wars against them upon the men who judge with honesty. Upon those men, famine and disaster never went. They work at their appointed tasks with merriment. Those who delight in violence and wicked sinful deeds, far-seeing Zeus, the son of Cronus, plans to punish. Get the idea of justice that comes out in the course of time. And this theme runs through Hesiod. It's very noticeable. The other road is better, which leads toward just dealing, for justice conquers violence and triumphs in the end. Or again, the eyes of Zeus, all-seeing and all-knowing, behold us even now, if thus he wills. The sort of justice that this city deals in within herself will not escape his notice. It is bad to be a man of justice if the less just is to have a greater right, if things are inverted. Or this again, get good measure from your neighbor and give good measure back. Okay, fair measures, scales. Return as much or better if you can, so that when you are yourself in need, you will find him able to supply it. So there are interesting parallels there, incidentally, to some of the things that you find in the Book of Proverbs. You see. But notice the concern for justice. The insistence that in the course of time, in Cronus' son, in the course of time, justice is going to be done. It's the very nature of things. Cosmic justice. Well, if you go on from Hesiod to Aeschylus' Orestia, you remember the house of Atreus and the blood feud that was tearing that family apart. And yet that blood feud is to be superseded by the rule of laws. Not by the vengeful fates, but by a rule of laws that harmonizes conflicting interests. Heavenly and earthly justice must be one. Or if you're familiar with Sophocles' Antigone, a similar story. Antigone's brother has been killed in fighting to retrieve his throne at Thebes from the usurper, Croesus. And King Croesus issues an edict that the body is to be left to rot. But Antigone defies the edict and obeys a higher law. The king threatens her with execution and demands that she confess her wrong. Did she choose flagrantly to disobey the king's edict? And here's her reply. Naturally. Since Zeus never promulgated such a law, nor will you find that justice publishes such laws to men below. I never thought your edicts had such force that they nullified the laws of heaven, which unwritten, not proclaimed, can boast a currency that everlastingly is valid, an origin beyond the birth of man. And I, whom no man's frown will frighten, am far from risking heaven's frown by flouting these. Okay? The appeal to a higher justice, the justice of heaven. Okay? Well, my point in pulling in those literary figures is really to set the context of ethical thinking into which the pre-Socratics come. After all, consider how large a place the poetry and literature of the earlier Greeks played in their education later. This is the stuff they were raised on, schooled on, that they celebrated. You see. So that it would be at least odd if something of this didn't appear in early Greek philosophy, to the effect that this is an ordered universe. Yes, in the macrocosm. And in the microcosm, we must have law-governed, ordered city-state. And in a further microcosm, the individual's moral life is part of a moral order in which justice will act. You see? So there's the picture. Now, with that in mind, turn to the anthology, which I asked you please to bring, and if you forgot, this is your gentle reminder. It's much harder to listen, simply, than to listen and look, both. Show and tell is a lot easier than just tell. But turn to page 8, where we have a selection, first, preceded by Thales, but from the second philosopher in the whole list of pre-Socratics that we ran over last time, namely Anaximander, on page 8. Look at the bottom of the first column, what he says. The source of coming to be of existing things is that into which destruction too happens. All right, the processes of nature, coming to be and passing out of existence. Okay? Generation, destruction. Those processes happen, and, quote, according to necessity. For they pay penalty and retribution to each other for their injustice according to the assessment of time. The assessment of time? Chronos, sun? You see? The assessment of time, Chronos, sun? The assessment of time. In the course of time, things get balanced out. You see? Now, of course, that's a passage in which it's talking about natural processes, not about moral aims. But notice that the metaphor in the language is taken from morality and applied back to the processes of nature. Because obviously it's a familiar notion to him that there is some sort of justice that will out in the end, in the course of time. So that moral notion is applied back to the order of nature. You see? Well, that sentence, the one that's in quotes there, ascribed to Anaximander, is one that is immediately discussed in the literature on this particular interpretation of the pre-Socratics. It's sort of the text for the whole thing. And if you're interested in pursuing some of the literature on it, look at the book that I've listed on the board by Werner Jaeger, a book called Paideia, which is really first steps, first principles, having to do with the learning of the Greeks. A very excellent thing on the culture and ideas of ancient Greece. So Anaximander makes that strange, perplexing comment, which I think only begins to make sense after we've read the poets. You see? All right, turn to page 12, where, page 12, we have Pythagoras, who has the notion of a mathematical order to nature that balances the opposing forces that seem to be at work. Now, one of the things that doesn't come through in this, these selections is the way in which he applies this not only to nature's processes, but also to the life of society. In fact, Pythagoras was the founder of a little community. I notice that our editor calls it a cult. It's sometimes called a society, a city-state. Well, I suppose you could think of it like one of those religious or ethical communities founded in America in idealistic days, late 19th century perhaps, of which there are several strewn around the Midwest, as well as in the Anabaptist, Mennonite groups in various parts of the country. That is to say, a morally idealistic community living together and ordering their lives in what we think of as countercultural ways. Yes. Well, Pythagoras founded a group of that sort. A group in which there was to be this harmony of opposing interests, a balance of opposing influences and forces at work in the community, a well-ordered, rationally governed life, characterized by justice. Now, the word that he uses is the word peras, which, as those of you who are in the Greek know, means a border or a boundary. The Greeks know that, the rest of you barbarians know it now. So he distinguishes between peras, which is order, and the other side of the coin, the opposing force, is apeiron, that which is undefined, unlimited. You remember that's the term that Anaximander had used for the basic stuff, is an unlimited, undefinable something. You see? So in addition to that sort of phenomenon which Anaximander was aware of, namely that the underlying stuff seems to have all sorts of unmanageable, undefinable properties about it, but it'll all come out in the wash in the course of time, says Anaximander. Now Pythagoras goes one step further and says there is actually an intelligible order to nature, peras. And in the world of nature, we can trace the order mathematically. You see? Well, the way in which they work that out in society is reflected in some of the